cloud of black smoke burped from the exhaust pipe as the engine puttered out, and a moment later the door opened and the driver emerged. It was a young person who looked to be somewhere in their 20s, although at first glance Dorothy was unsure if it was a man or a woman. They had short, unkempt hair dyed a lurid neon pink, and were dressed in a pair of dungarees of the sort one might expect a labourer on a building site to wear. The youth did not seem to have any kind of coat or knitwear, despite it being unseasonably cool for early May, and Dorothy could see tattoos snaking up their arms like graffiti. The person reached into the back seat of the car and heaved out a large, well-worn backpack, then kicked the door shut, causing the vehicle to shake precariously. It was only when they turned to face Shelley House that Dorothy realised she was looking at a young woman. The girl's face gave nothing away as she surveyed the building, but Dorothy could imagine her taking it in with a mixture of apprehension and awe. After all, one did not come across dwellings like Shelley House every day. Built during the reign of Queen Victoria and named after the English Romantic poet, its broad facade was a mixture of precise red brickwork and embossed white masonry, topped by an ornate balustrade. Wide stone steps led up to the imposing front door, over which the words Shelley House, 1891, were engraved in Gothic script. Impressive bay windows framed the door on the first 2 floors, while the highest floor, once the servants' quarters before the building was converted into flats, had smaller, rectangular dormer windows. Dorothy could still remember the first time she had seen the building herself. How she had stopped in the middle of the pavement and stared, mouth agape, marvelling at its grandeur and history. It was the most beautiful house she had ever seen, and Dorothy had pledged there and then that it would become her home. 34 years later, it still was. The pink-haired girl continued regarding the building, and as her eyes swept along the ground floor, they seemed to pause for a moment on Dorothy's window. Dorothy instinctively drew back, even though she knew nobody could see her through the net curtain. Still, she found her heart beating a little faster as she watched the young woman climb the steps and disappear from view at the front door. Who was she coming to visit in the middle of the working day? Perhaps the uncouth new tenant in flat 4. Dorothy waited to hear the sound of a distant bell ringing and was therefore utterly confounded when she heard the unfamiliar chime of her own. Good gracious, it was for her. Should she answer it? It had been a long time since Dorothy had had a caller, and the girl hardly looked trustworthy. Perhaps she was one of those scoundrels who preyed on vulnerable elderly people, tricking her way into their homes, robbing them and then leaving them for dead. Of course, Dorothy was neither vulnerable nor stupid enough to fall for such a trick, but this young rapscallion was not to know that. Should she fetch a knife from the kitchen drawer, just in case? The bell sounded again, jolting Dorothy. She reached for her pencil, the nib was sharp enough to be used as a weapon if circumstances required, and moved to her front door. Some years earlier, a previous landlord had installed an overly elaborate entry system, whereby when someone rang her bell, a video appeared on a little screen by her door, showing Dorothy who was there, and even allowing her to speak to them before she buzzed them in. Dorothy had been horrified by it, even when the engineer insisted that the video was one way and the person outside could not see her. Now she lowered her face so that her nose was almost touching the screen. It showed a grainy black and white image of the woman, who was chewing a fingernail as she waited for an answer. What could she possibly want? The bell sounded a 3rd time, a longer, more persistent ring. Dorothy cleared her throat before she pressed the button labelled Intercom. "Who are you and what do you want from me?" She had to shout to be heard above the 3rd act of Götterdämmerung, which was still playing in the background. "I've come about the room." Dorothy frowned. "You must be mistaken. There is no room here, I assure you." She heard an audible sigh through the intercom. "Has it gone already? You could have let me know. I've driven all the way here especially."